But Noel is back with us again because Noel, a lot of points there, a lot of feedback from suppliers in particular, and I'd be interested to see, how you respond and what you're going to do over the next, 12 months or so in response to that.
Thanks, Damien. Indeed, lots of food for thought, a lot of numbers, a lot of stats, but a huge interest to us as an enforcement authority. So happy to expand on that and talk more broadly about our priorities ahead of the transfer of our functions to the new office that the Minister will talk about shortly. So priorities for the rest of 2022. It's going to be heavily informed by the survey results, clearly. There's a need for a targeted communications campaign. We've known that. We've held actually off on commencing that communications campaign until we had the survey results because we wanted to bring a real focus to it. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, we have done some press releases, advertising and articles, but it needs to be much more escalated. It needs to be much more higher profile, and we know that, and that's going to happen. There's going to be specific messaging at both targeting at both buyers and suppliers in the comms campaign. And that's going to commence later this month. So it'll be across print, social media and radio. It's going to be quite high profile and people will hear a lot more about it. And clearly there's a lot of detail in the regulations. We're going to be directing people onto our website and both buyers and suppliers on the need to educate themselves. I just want to maybe talk a bit specifically about some of the survey results. Because clearly that's going to inform what we need to target. And maybe the first thing I should say about the survey results, even though baseline levels are low across a number of parameters, it wasn't that surprising to us. We looked at other regulations and other enforcement authorities, and not just in unfair trading practices, in other regimes. It's relatively normal. That baseline level awareness is poor. That's the challenge. It doesn't make the challenge any less. But that's what it is, and that's the challenge for us now to address. So key headlines, half of suppliers unaware of regulations. And when you drill into it, PP's primary producers, only 1 in 7 primary producers, about 1 in 5 business-to-business suppliers are actually aware that they have legal protection against 16 specified UTPs, so that's particularly low. Need for awareness on the specifics there. Interesting one on the business-to-business survey that caught my eye. So the top black UTP, when we asked the business-to-business community over the past 2 years, which of the unfair trading practices have you been subject to? About 1/3 of them said they haven't been paid for perishable goods within 30 days. So that's a key message for us, the need to re-engage with the buyer community. Also interesting to pick out those who said they were subject to UTP in the past 2 years. Why didn't you raise the issue with anyone? So 60% of primary producers and about half of the business suppliers said it's common practice in the sector and fear retaliation. So I think we need to think about that. If you look at that first bullet, common practice, so it's become normalized. Remember, this was on foot of us showing a list of the 16 UTPs. And I know there's a lot of external noise saying X, Y, and Z should be prescribed for, but I think what a lot of suppliers need to realize, they're actually being impacted by UTPs that are actually regulated for. And when they were asked, why didn't you complain? They said, well, it's not normal, it's common practice, it shouldn't be. We're an enforcement authority. Tell us, understand what the UTP regulations are, understand the detail, and come and complain to us if you're being impacted. Just because it's common practice doesn't mean that it's acceptable. And the other big message is the fear factor. And this very much came through the EU impact assessment in 2018. This is a European-wide phenomenon where the larger buyer is almost seen as intimidating, and the economic consequences by the smaller supplier of making a complaint is seen as a big barrier to making a complaint. So we want to address that in the comms campaign. And final point is that if you are subjected to UTP going forward, when we asked them, would you make a complaint to us as the enforcement authority, only said half they would do that. And we would think that the previous 2 bullet points are the reasons behind that. So big challenges for us as an enforcement authority that we're happy to meet head on in terms of the communications campaign. So again, our broader enforcement approach, apart from the comms piece, will again be informed by survey findings. So when I talk about that proactive engagement, I'm talking about The liaison officer model that we have, the quarterly meetings with the largest retailers, the largest wholesalers will continue. It will be informed by the survey, and we will continue to push them in terms of to demonstrate to us what they're doing to develop a culture of compliance, but also the large buyers that I referenced, the first buyers, the primary producers. As I mentioned, we've recently asked them to nominate compliance officers. So we're going to be holding webinars, information events with those compliance officers to explain to them what they need to do to take control of their businesses' compliance affairs to ensure that they can take all the necessary steps to compatible with the regulations. It's beyond the scope of an event like today. We'll be doing that later. But, and here's the but, it's not all about soft reach out. We will be, based on evidence, we'll have targeted inspections later this year. And it'll be targeted clearly at the biggest players in specific sectors where we have intelligence that there is particular issues. So that can be expected, and we will do that later this year. And clearly, where necessary, investigations will take place and appropriate sanctions will apply because we have very strong powers under the regulations and we won't be afraid to use them. So I just want to talk briefly about the handover to the new office. This is the new Office for Fairness and Transparency and the Food Supply Chain. So the general scheme of the bill was approved by Cabinet in March for that new office. And Minister will talk in detail about that. But essentially, when the Act is commenced, we will hand over our powers. When the Act is commenced, established office, we will hand over our implementation reports, any of our other records, anything to do with compliance. And we're making this very clear in our engagement currently with buyers, that this doesn't stop that level of compliance reporting you're doing to us. This will all be handed over to the new office, and that will in turn inform potential inspections, potential investigations, and it's not exclusively on implementation reports. We'll have other records and intelligence that we'll gather in the course of compliance monitoring. That's all going to be handed over. Files, clearly, if we have open complaints or investigations or legal proceedings active, that's not all going to stop just because we're handing over to new office. That's all going to be seamlessly continued. We're going to work very closely with the new CEO when he or she is appointed to the new office and their team to ensure that there's a seamless transition and that there's a continuity of enforcement. I wanted to say a few key messages to both buyers and suppliers. And what I'm going to say here is actually pulled from the very simple 6-point checklist that we're telling all buyers that they must do. So what you must do is you must ensure that all your supply agreements are in compliance with the regulations. But that seems like a very simple statement, but there's an awful lot of due diligence. Some businesses don't have a centralized control or a handle on their supply agreements. Largely the largest one, it may be somewhat dispersed. They need to get a handle on it. They need to know what's in both their written and, crucially, oral supply agreements. Because just because you have an oral supply agreement, you are not shielded from your obligations under the regulations. So there's a big due diligence process there for all businesses that need to do. And when I say all businesses, any business with a turnover higher than 2 million is in scope for these regulations. And that's just turnover of everything, not just agri-food products. If your turnover across all product is over 2 million, you are in scope for the regulations. But clearly buyers can be still found if they acted unfairly if the behaviour of the buyer's business is breaches. So that's another big nuance that is frequently missed. You could have a 10 out of 10 rock solid supply agreement, but if your staff are engaging in behaviour and actions that's breaching the regulations, you'll bring your business down. We will bring enforcement actions against those businesses, and that's why what buyers should do to ensure behaviour-related breaches, the regulations don't occur, that we're asking through the 6-point checklist, is asking businesses, you need to review and amend where appropriate your organisational policies, procedures and controls to ensure that they're in compliance with the regulations, because these are the documents that in good business practices available to your employees to know that, well, with what was normalised practice, is it still compatible with regulations? That's a detailed due diligence exercises that individual businesses will need to do. And we're also saying you need to ensure appropriate training and dissemination of information is undertaken on a regular basis. So we've all gone to training courses and we found a lot of information, but human nature being what it is, in 6 months' time, you're sort of saying, well, what actually was in that? And that's why, to supplement training actions, business should also regularly disseminate and remind quarterly basis. Businesses will know best. And we're not prescribing to businesses what they should, how they should go about it. We're advising them what they should do. The regulations, by the way, don't prescribe any of these actions. This is what we're advising business. This is good practice for you to ensure that you can remain compliant. What we're saying to suppliers is get onto our website, know your rights, understand what the 16 prohibited trading practices are, because these are your rights if they're breached. We want you to contact the enforcement authority in confidence if you feel you've been subject to unfair trading practice. Okay, we've got very simple resource materials, little simple small leaflet that can be downloaded from our website. And this is for suppliers, just to get an initial understanding what your protections are. We realize there's a lot of information and data today. Take your time, go onto your website, understand the details and understand which of them, because as we know from the survey that Bernie demonstrated, not all of them will have relevance to your business model. We can see from primary producers, many of the grey ones wouldn't be that relevant, but some of the black ones will be very relevant. And so focus on the ones that's relevant to your business and understand that that's your right as a business, that prohibited practice shouldn't be breached. So in conclusion, new office is planned to take over enforcement function later this year, but we want to emphasise in the interim, any business that's found to have breached the regulations, we will hold them to account. We want to make that very clear. So what we're saying, particularly with the businesses we've reached out to, the largest ones, engage with us, ensure that your business is UTP ready. Thanks, Damien.
No, thanks. Just 1 second, Noel, because that last question, do you understand suppliers' reluctance to make a complaint against their buyer? Now, this was a survey online, which includes all stakeholders, including obviously buyers as well. And the result is yes, say 82%, no, say 18%. What does that tell you? How does that tally with the research earlier on? Totally tallies, Bernie said.
Yeah.
Half of them said that they wouldn't reach out and contact anybody, but clearly in this poll there's a lot more of...
Yeah, that very much resonates. I'm not surprised. We see that as the fear factor coming through.
Right.
And we've got a job of work for us, as I said.
Yeah. It's a small sample, but sizable enough at the same time.
It's indicative
of our online.
It's indicative of the challenges.
Yeah. Okay, well, staying with them, Noel, thank you very much, and we'll hear from Noel again before the end. But I just have one more question on Slido for those of you that are tuned in, both here and abroad as well. What activities, in your opinion, should the enforcement authority prioritise in the immediate future? There are three options here. Firstly, focus on ensuring buyers are compliant with their obligations under the UTP regulations. Secondly, focus on ensuring suppliers are aware of their rights of the UTP regulations. And the third option is both these issues are of equal importance and should be progressed simultaneously. So it's quite a long question there, but you can have a look at it. You have 30 seconds or thereabouts just to answer, and I will bring you the results of that a little bit later.